Hey, everybody out there. We're back with another, I think, interesting episode. And the topic this time is Joe Rogan and his use of the N word and how he's been castigated because of that. With us are the familiar faces you've seen before. We have John Woodford to my right there, who's a long career in editing and reporting in the news, along with Kent Garrett, who has a long career in news as well. He's also a producer at CBS in New York City and ABC. And also, Brian Thomas, who is a longtime newsman as well, most recently at the AP News Bureau in Washington, D.C. And by the way, Kent Garrett and John Woodford are also members of the regular podcast by the name of The Last Negroes at Harvard. And Kent has written a book on that and soon to be a movie, but not starring.
Hopefully, yes.
All right. Well, all right, guys. Now, hot topic here. Still in the news about Joe Rogan being heavily criticized and almost taken off of Spotify because of his use of the N word. Somebody compiled a series of his uses of that, like from 10, 20 years ago, put him up on the internet, and a lot of heat came down on him. So our question to explore today is, is this overkill? Should somebody lose his job, his career, and respect because of a past use? And then again, you have to consider the context in which it was used. So we'll start with Kent Garrett. What do you think, Kent?
Well, I don't think silencing him in terms of this thing is really the answer. I mean, I think it's certainly more complicated. I mean, I think those things. What he said started back in 2014, which, as you say, was a different time and all that. But I mean, I think something has to be done. I'm not sure. I think he should be suspended, or there has to be some sort of punishment, I think, for using that word.
Well, what kind of
the N word?
What kind of context was it used in?
I listened to a few of the things that the singer India Aries, put together, and a lot of it was not in context. A lot of it was sort of joking. A lot of it was, I don't think in many ways there's any real context that you can use the N word. I mean, how do you feel about that, John? I mean, I think we might differ on that.
Well, since it's used so often, especially by Black people themselves, in all sorts of contexts, it's hard to have an absolute kind of view on it. If someone is meaning to insult people, that's one thing, because whether they're insulting Black people or anyone else, I mean, someone could use poor deplorables in a way that should be censored, or redneck, or hillbilly. It depends on how they use it. One guy's written a book, the Hillbilly, what is it, Elegy or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
he said he's from someplace in Ohio, and then people call themselves that. But another person could then say to someone, "Well, you're nothing but a stupid hillbilly," and it would be an insult. And so I think this should be judged the same way. There's nothing mystical about the term, unless people make a fetish of it. It strikes me as kind of odd, for example, that someone would say they shouldn't read Huckleberry Finn because it'll have Nigger Jim in it, and that there are many words in fiction that could be insulting to many different people. So I can't see how people would be thin-skinned about it on one hand, and then impervious on another.
Yeah, Kent.
I mean, if you go to a playground with the guys playing ball and stuff, you're going to hear an awful lot of it.
No, I know you're going to hear it, but I mean, I think it's a question of whether white people should be using that word. That's the key to me.
Well, again, I think it depends on the context. Now, if I didn't see Joe Rogan's cast on that, but I mean, you have people that are buddies with each other, and they call each other epithets that wouldn't be accepted in normal conversation, but between themselves, it's almost a joke. Now, I'll come out with the words that I've been called over the years as an Italian American. As a kid, I was called a guinea, a wop, a greaseball, and other terms. Now, it was meant to be offensive by the people who were calling me that. So yeah, that shouldn't go. But yet, another Italian American may call me that kiddingly, and it wouldn't be offensive. And then you got to go to literature and movies. Now, in literature, Kent, would you say that Nigger Jim in Huckleberry Finn should forever be banned, and kids shouldn't be exposed to it, or adults?
No, I mean, no, I agree with John on that. I mean, and again, I think that's a question of context. I mean, I think it's a different long time ago.
That's
and
right.
It's a question of context. I mean, and again, I give Joe Rogan benefits or props for, 2014 was a long time ago. And certainly things have changed now. I mean, the times have changed, but I mean, I don't think you can use it with sort of license. I mean, I think that's the, and I agree with John. I mean, in terms of how you're sort of using it. I mean, is it to abuse somebody, or is it in anger or something like that?
Well, look, over the past 5 years, ever since we had to listen to Trump talking about the people coming over the border and calling them bad hombres and all this other sort of stuff, this kind of open dialogue from the president of the United States opened the door for every crackpot in the world to step up to the bully pulpit and shoot his mouth off. So this kind of oral diarrhea is not a surprise, or shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. That doesn't mean you're going to excuse it. You shouldn't excuse it. And I think that's what people are missing the point of here, is that the whole atmosphere has changed here. And what used to be something that was said only in the privacy of one's home suddenly gets through a megaphone, whether it's online or whether it's at a rally, anywhere where the public is involved. Suddenly it's okay to be a bigot. And I don't think it is.
Right. And I think it's just the opposite. I mean, you bring a lot of this stuff back to Trump in all of our conversations. But I mean, if anything, people are much more guarded about the use of racial terms and ethnic terms now than they used to be. Now, you always get crackpots on the internet, but that's a function of that technology. But generally in society, everybody's afraid to say anything that might be considered offensive in any way. I mean, it's gotten to a point where it's ridiculous. Now, as I said, the N word shouldn't be used loosely, but you've got to consider the context. And it's gotten to a point now where they're banning it even in the literature. Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn. There's other great literature that have used the term, but it reflects the society at the time. And by the way, if you really examine Huckleberry Finn, he was very sympathetic to Jim. Mark Twain was against slavery, and he was depicting the way the perceptions, the social perceptions and mores of the time. He wasn't endorsing it, and that's being lost now. Well, you absolutely can't use it. Nobody should read that anymore. I mean, it's gone to such an extreme part. And look at movies, Quentin Tarantino's movies, Pulp Fiction and others, where blacks and whites who are in a gang together are using that term freely, but in that context, they're not insulting each other. So should movies and literature scrub that also from now on? I don't think so.
Well, I think one of the things that you and I have talked about previously was when All in the Family first became a hit on television.
Yeah.
Norman Lear went to great lengths to say, I did this show to categorize bigotry and to point out how stupid it was, and to get people to think about the things they say before they open their mouths. I submit that just the opposite occurred. I think it engendered an entire generation of bigots to come out of the woodwork and to say, hey, I see this on TV. Why can't I be like that? I'll always believe that. Brian, I know you don't. I do.
Brian, if you watch the episodes, whenever that came up, when he'd call the black neighbor, make some remarks like that, Archie Bunker was always shot down and always shown to be a stupid bigot. So I think it had just the opposite effect. It humanized that black neighbor, and the onus was on Archie Bunker for being insensitive and for being behind the times. So I think it was just the opposite.
I know you do, and we've always had this discussion. I still think it opened the door for a lot of heinous behavior that otherwise would not have occurred.
I mean, I think you're right about that, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, if one uses the N-word, does that make one, by definition, a bigot? See, it's a little more contextual and subtle than that, I think.
Not only that, I think that discrimination, bias, mistreatment of Black people certainly didn't spark with the Archie Bunker show, when it happened long before that, and I don't think there was an uptick because of the Archie Bunker show either. I don't think that. I think that drama at least has a potential of, as they say, it's people work out some of their feelings, and it can be just as likely to educate someone or enlighten them as to have them revel in it. So it depends on the audience. But here you have kids, you have lyrics in songs. Once the hip hop rap started coming, then the airwaves in mass produced musical offerings is filled not just with the N-word, but things derogatory to women, or extolling violence or theft or drugs. So a lot of things came out in this recent period, and we can argue that some of it, I think, is unhealthy. But why can't a white kid, if he likes a lyric, so a white kid is singing what he heard a Black kid sing, maybe he's buying the record and he's singing it. Now, is he going to be called a racist just because he sings the same lyric that a Black person wrote and sang?
I mean, I agree with you. I'm saying I think it's more subtle than that. It's more complicated. Yeah. I mean, and
it is.
Well, that'd be considered cultural appropriation, though, for a white.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Again, another extreme, I think. And Ken, we've talked about this in the past. You would be against All in the Family episodes from being rerun now because of that context, correct?
I think I would, and I think I would be not in favor of Joe Rogan's 2014 pieces running again. I would be against Amos and Andy sort of running again. I would, yeah. I mean, again, I'm putting it in a different time situation, in a different context.
Yeah.
I mean, because again, I don't think if someone uses the N-word, you can necessarily call them a bigot. Although, I'm a little worried about white people sort of using it in the sense that there is this long history of cultural oppression between of whites against Blacks.
Well, my concern is that it's the sensitivity that I worry about in terms of using that word. If you hear it all the time, you become insensitive to it. You don't remember what it means to be hurt on the other end of that stick. You don't have a sensitivity that I shouldn't be saying things like this. And all you have to do is, as Larry pointed out in the beginning, is have someone come back at your heritage and say something in a derogatory fashion just for the sake of being mean. And if that's the measure now we're at in terms of not just this insult, but all insults, wetbacks, the whole Megillah, then I think we've really slipped.
Yeah, Brian, that's the point I've been making. Is again, it's the context.
No, but Larry, I mean, like we had when I was doing WIOX Radio, which is a local, but on the internet show broadcast from here in Roxbury. I had a couple of years ago, I had a guy who was a really great guest. I mean, really articulate, brilliant, but he always used the N word as sort of everyday talking, but he used it in context. He used it in context. Every time he used it, it made some sort of sense. He led to it correctly, and it made sense. And the station management up here was really totally upset about it. And the question was, what are we going to do about it? And what was decided was that we would, and again, these are beyond those 5 or 7 words that you can't use based on the FCC. I mean, we decided that he could not say it because it was a word that a certain percentage of the community here in Roxbury, I think we figured out 80%, would find that word offensive and be made uncomfortable by it. So the decision was made that, hey, you can't use that word. And the guy ended up quitting. But I mean, that was how we handle it up here. And where I live is sort of a real Republican Trump country, redneck country sort of.
Was the guy black or white?
The guy was white. The guy was a great guest. He was white. He was actually Jewish, as a matter of fact.
Well,
here's a good thing. Speaking of that, you remember the Jackie Mason brouhaha in the mayoral election in New York City, when David Dinkins was running for re-election. Jackie Mason was emceeing some sort of a fundraiser, or not a fundraiser, but a forum, and Rudy Giuliani was there, and Jackie Mason was asked to pass comment on David Dinkins, and Jackie Mason was very quick. I mean, a lot of times he didn't have his brain in gear before he shot his mouth off. But at any rate, he called David Dinkins a fancy Schwarzer with a mustache. Now, now, for those of you who don't know, Schwarzer is a slang Yiddish term for a black. So everybody kind of chuckled because there were a lot of Jews in the audience.
Right.
And what they tried to do was to see Rudy Giuliani's reaction, to say, well, he laughed because he's a bigot. Well, there was only a slight smile on Giuliani's face, and the whole thing still got, twisted around in the media and boiled up. And then, of course, mainstream media had to explain what I just did for you now. What's the definition of a Schwarzer? It's something that is obviously a derogatory term that many blacks find offensive. So when I was doing the story in Hartford, I explained the whole thing, and all of the Jews who I worked with came in and they were just convulsed in laughter, not because of what Jackie Mason had said, but because of what they heard on the radio. One guy walked in and said, I can't believe I actually heard the word Schwarzer on the air.
Schwarzer just means black. So, again, if you take the context, it just depends. If it's intended to be insulting, that's one thing. And now you just have to say, then were they going to take words like yids or kike and use it the same way? And are they going to accept that on the
exactly
air?
Right. That's exactly
Because
right.
they better be ready for a reversal on that. And if they're not, they're hypocritical. Yeah. That's like knocking Whoopi Goldberg, who's obviously not the sharpest, knife in the drawer. She thinks, but her definition, however she uses the word race, she thought that the Holocaust or the genocide of Jews, as we say, had nothing to do with race. Well, you define race a certain way, maybe there's another term, but for her to be knocked off the air for it, considering that the number of people who are not knocked off the air,
that's right,
for saying who actually have malice in their statements, it's pretty hypocritical to knock her off the air when you're going to not knock off the air people who say things that are much worse.
I mean, do you think Rogan should be knocked off the air? I mean, what do you think Spotify should do about it? Yeah.
No, it makes what they're it's it gives them too much. It loads up the words as if they actually are more significant. So it kind of plays into, I think, a kind of fetish experience of language.
I mean, do you think if one uses the word enough, if it's out there enough, uses it enough, it becomes meaningless? I mean, it loses its power. The N word.
Yeah, it becomes simple. Yeah, it just means to look what Chris Rock, he's got whole routines where he'll say,
Yeah.
"Hey, the only trouble we have with black people is with the ends,"
Right.
and it makes a distinction, and it makes it people laugh, and he leads up to it, and he uses it in his routine. Well, there are many such things. Look at like Paul, the guy who died, who used to write for Paul. Oh God. Anyway, there are many black comedians who've used it, and then some of them, of course, and then Bill Cosby got on some of them for using it, and then that flipped back. Who are you to be talking about niceties of language? And here you are drugging and raping people. But so the absurdity of a lot of this stuff, I think, when you exaggerate the significance of it too much, you're kind of playing into the hands of people who just want to control speech and want to do speech battles. They want to have a speech battle while injustices and inequalities go on. They don't get to the source of it.
That's right.
There's another argument made along these lines about desensitizing the word, just like the gay community now uses the term queer openly and using it in context that they're proud, this and that. Also, I mean, I understand the sensitivity and it should always be guarded, but at the same time, there's a downside of this where we become so hypersensitive that I think it works against people just accepting each other. For instance, during the days of the Rat Pack, Sammy Davis Jr., Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, I can remember one episode. You can still see this on YouTube, where Dean Martin said to Frank Sinatra that I guess Frank Sinatra appeared at some NAACP affair in support of Black people. And anyway, Dean Martin picked up Sammy Davis Jr., who was small, and brought him over to Frank Sinatra and said, "I'd like to present this award from the NAACP." In other words, depicting Sammy Davis Jr. as a statue. They got a big laugh. They were buddies, and the Rat Pack, I mean, they took in Sammy Davis Jr. as an equal and promoted him. And even when he was dating Anita Ekberg, a white woman, blonde, they supported that. Now, this is back in the 60s. So, and I think that actually advanced race relations because, people accepted Sammy Davis Jr. like one of the boys. So the point I'm making is, even though, you've got to be careful these days, the hypersensitivity, I think, is counterproductive.
Yeah, but I mean, I think if this guy Rogan, whatever his name is, has, I think he has 11 million people that watch his podcast. Certain, I don't know how many of the people that listen are Black or how many people that listen are offended by what he's saying and end up feeling bad about what he has said if he uses the N word. I mean, I think they have to be dealt with. I mean, I think, it gets to the question of, well, is Spotify a platform or a publisher? If it's a publisher, and I think it is a publisher, they have to deal with that reality that you're making out of those 11 million people, you're maybe making, 5 million unhappy, sad, or pissed off or whatever.
By the way,
were they unhappy? Did they respond when he did it? If he did it way back there, how come they didn't? How come there was no outcry immediately?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
We don't know what the you don't know what the publicity ring was there.
And I don't know what his audience was then back there.
Exactly. Yeah.
By the way, Ken, just an aside there, talking about the white guy who was using the N word, and they finally
on the station,
because so many 80% of the people would have been offended by. The way I remember it, Kent, you were probably the only Black person in that area.
Oh yeah.
The station management was all white, And so
Right.
it's the whites who were offended. And they were, the bulk of the population.
Right. I mean, I was arguing on the other side, really, saying that, hey, let's have free speech and all that.
All right, now look, we've thrown out these actual words on this podcast. So, in terms of an academic discussion, which I think we're doing, should it also be banned generally? What we've been saying should be banned because we've actually used the word.
No.
I don't think so either.
No, I mean, I think probably. I mean, I think in the sense that if there's another word you could use, I mean, if you can, it's all about communication. So if you can communicate without using that word, I mean, I think it makes sense. In other words, I think on your show, this broadcast we're doing now, there'll be a certain percentage of people that would be offended by the actual use of the N-word. So why there's no confusion about what we're talking about, right?
But I think it's artificially awkward, to avoid it, especially in a serious academic discussion like this.
This isn't a serious academic discussion. I mean, I'm not a serious academic. I mean, you guys.
We're all newsmen, so it's an analysis. So,
all right, okay.
Therefore, you object to me using the word and John using the word.
I think, yeah, I do. I mean, I think it's unnecessary. Doesn't have to be used to make our point. How do you feel about it, Brian?
I think that's a strange frame of mind for someone to know what someone means when they say the regular word, and to somehow they're in a different state of mind or different psychological experience if someone says N-word. After a while, people won't need to say the word, which, they can just say, well, those rotten N-words did such and such, and the N-words did that. Hey, come on, N-word, get over here. And then people will say, well, now you can't say N-word. Sorry. Yeah, you're going to have to say, let me see, blank word or X word, or you can just say N. It gets to be absolutely absurd. And it's such a primitive response to language to me. All
right, but John, what if Rogan started using the N-word now? What if on his next show you couldn't care less? You don't care?
I don't care one bit. I can call him something if I want to, if I feel like it.
Yeah, but you don't have an audience of 11 million people.
That's the hook right there.
Yeah. So what if he does? What are those 11 million going to do? We can call the 35 million, can call the 11 million something.
Yeah, the size of the audience has nothing to do.
Let it all thrash out. Who cares?
All right, what do you think?
I couldn't care less what he has to say about it. I don't know him that. I don't know what his, didn't he come out and have some kind of conscience?
Kind of an abject apology, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, he had made an apology.
So I don't know. Maybe some of the people whom if he did mislead anyone, maybe some of them will go through some of the same thinking and decide that they either do or don't want to insult people, if they meant to insult people. But then, of course, they also have to deal with the fact that a lot of them may have used it and not really intended it to insult people, because they could be singing the lyrics of something that some black rap person composed.
Right.
Here's another anecdote. Years ago, you might remember there was a rash of Polish jokes back in the 70s. Mm-hmm. Everybody had a Polish joke. And a fellow by the name of Edward Pietzek, who was the head of Mrs. Paul's Foods, was of Polish extraction. And he came to Hartford and other cities, and I happened to be working in Hartford at the time, and he ponied up $25 million in a media fund to help stamp out Polish jokes. That was his stated goal. Mm-hmm. And in the process, one reporter from the United Press asked him in Hartford, "What do you have against Polish jokes?" And he said, "Nothing. As long as the intent is to make people laugh, and not to denigrate and not to pigeonhole and not to criticize because of race, color, or your ethnic beliefs, then I don't have I would not have a problem with it. But if you put in any of those ingredients in the joke, then I have a problem.
I think
And
that's a good point.
I don't know. Now, I don't know how you differentiate any of those exclusions that he was saying, but it again, we get back to sensitivity. And I think he was just trying to say, put your brain in gear before you open your mouth. That's all.
Right. Let me bring up this anecdote, Brian. You guys all remember Don Rickles, who recently passed.
Yeah.
Now, he was known as, the dean of insult humor. And I can remember a roast that he took part in. Remember when they had those roasts on TV?
Yeah.
With different celebrities, and the person being roasted was Frank Sinatra. And he went through this whole thing about Sinatra and the mob, and Italian names were mimicked and all that. I laughed my head off, and Sinatra did too. And even though, Italians have an undeserved reputation that we're all mafia people, and me being Italian American who was called names when I was a kid and since then, I wasn't offended by it because, again, it wasn't in that context, and it was really funny. It was an exaggeration of the Italian ethnicity and the names and all that, and so-and-so, he got a two in the head, blah, blah, blah. It was a hilarious exchange, I thought. But today, you can't do that. And this is what I'm saying. It's become so extreme that we're losing perspective on all this. Again, when somebody means something in an insulting, disparaging, demeaning way. And there's other times where it's good humor. And again, I'm not saying that you should be very loose with the N word, but again, there's context. Now, also the Godfather movies, there's scenes in there where they're calling the Italians are calling each other disparaging names, Guinea and all that. And the outsiders are calling them that too. Now, that depicted the atmosphere back then among New York mob families and the conflicting gangs and all that. So should that not be in movies anymore? This was a slice of reality back then. It was artistically depicted. And, but now in movies that are coming out now in literature, they're getting, they're very careful not to include any of that. And again, it doesn't reflect reality now, or especially back then. And again, that's a disservice, I think, to the public.
And you know what? If Joe Rogan is not careful, he'll be swimming with the fishes.
You see, what do you think? That all Italians do that, Bryant? I am highly insulted. I mean, you may think it's a joke, but other people out there listening are going to take it to heart. And when they see me on the street, they're going to think I'm some kind of a mobster. And my name is similar to the Sopranos on the air. And you can make fun of that. So see what I mean? You see what I mean?
Exactly. No, I do.
But I mean, I think it does get back to Trump and to the whole lowering of, in a sense, morality, or lowering of a sense of shame. In other words, there's no longer the sense of shame in the country has been lowered, or there's less of it, in the sense that, for example, when you would correct a politician, he made a mistake, he said something wrong, that politician would not say it again, or he would correct it. But that doesn't happen anymore. I mean, they just go on and say it and all that. So I
find ways to justify it. That's
exactly ways to justify it. And I think that's why all this is coming out. You know what I mean?
I don't see it that way at all. I see politicians generally being more careful than ever. Now, some of the conservatives are striking back against the extreme political correctness and people who are offended at every little thing that you say. And I don't think this stems back to Trump. I mean, Trump, look, and here's something else that Brian and I differ on a lot. The media is not what it used to be, an objective watchdog for the public. They are now cheerleaders and propagandists. They're on board with one side or the other, both sides, all the news outlets, and both sides of the aisle are corrupt. So I don't trace this back to Trump at all. If anything, it developed a pushback on some of the outrageous accusations that some politicians are being accused of, and how the press was trying to skewer them on every little thing.
I mean,
Here's my take on objectivity. If you do a story, and any of us in this group know that, if you decide to do a story based on the information that you have on any person or event or situation, if you decide to do a story, you have made an editorial decision about whether to do that story. You start from a subjective point when you write the first line of that story. You can't start from an objective point, or you wouldn't do the story. You have to have some goal in mind with the story when you begin. And the minute you make that decision to say, all right, I'm going to do this story because I think it's a good story, that's a subjective decision. It's not objective. And people think that there's this, pot of gold of objectivity at the end of the rainbow here when we all go to writer's heaven, and they think, well, it's all going to work out. Well, no. If you start with any story and you start with a subjective position in order to do that story, that has to be understood by listeners and writers and viewers.
Brian,
and if they don't understand,
the story starts with the event, not with you. The story starts with whatever happened. So I would say the story starts with, as far as your standpoint is, something outside you. Something that was objective. In other words, the forces that led to that event. Now you are now going to come to it and try to figure out whether you're going to figure out how and why it happened and who did what, and you're going to then bring it to the public. But you didn't make up. You aren't really the source of that story.
Yeah, the event is of
reality.
But I could understand Brian's point that it is it's not objective. Story selection is subjective. However, I wouldn't take it to that extreme. I mean, a story in the old days, anything what was considered a legitimate story was much more legitimate, I think. Now, this gets into some of my pet peeves about the media today. You talk about objective media and the stories that are not being covered. The Hunter Biden laptop, the Johns Hopkins study regarding the lockdown ineffectiveness, the Wuhan lab leak, the illegal alien flights into Pennsylvania and other states, Pennsylvania where I reside, on and on, studies on ivermectin, the Olympic Games, people switching sides there. All these things are not covered by the mainstream media. So there is a subjective story selection there by not selecting them. But I think what John and I are on board with is that, when an event occurs, a legitimate journalist will see that it deserves to be reported. But now it's being filtered depending on whose political side you're cheering for.
Larry, what about the fact, what about the fact that Joe Rogan has indeed put out misinformation about COVID-19?
You consider it misinformation?
I think a lot of scientists have considered it.
A lot of scientists, legitimate scientists, are not being seen easily on the internet because they're being deep sixed by all these platforms. In terms of what is disinformation, look, time and time again, as we go on, it's been proven how a lot of this disinformation is just being selected by those in power. For instance, the Wuhan.
But don't you believe that there is a thing called disinformation?
There is, but who?
Yeah, but sometimes people put out mistaken information. Some of the things that Joe Rogan was accused of putting it out, he didn't think it was false. He thought it was true. He's not a scientist or an expert. There are many people who relate. Fauci made statements about what was going on that later were either modified or backtracked on. But at the time that he stated them, he thought they were true. But they don't say that was misinformation.
Yeah, but John, there is a thing called a body of truth. In the sense that if I'm doing a story, I don't have to put on somebody that thinks the world is flat, right?
No.
Aren't we beyond that?
It depends if someone's sailing
Oh,
out. I mean, it depends. You don't have to, but you don't know on a situation. You're not a scientist. You don't know whether the guy coming to talk about ivermectin or that other stuff. You don't really know
Right.
the depth of his knowledge. He's
Yeah.
got an argument. He should be able to put the argument out there as long as you are willing to publish in the same way the correction or the counter argument.
Yeah, see, Ken, you're deciding ahead of time what disinformation is, and you're no expert, and I'm no expert. But
but I'm an expert about the world being round. I mean, isn't that a reasonable? I mean,
okay,
100%, 99% of
you're,
scientists
you're using
feel.
you're using an extreme example that doesn't apply to the bit about the ivermectin about the.
Only to NBA players does that. Certain NBA players does that apply, Ken? Who said that the world was flat? I can't remember which one.
Yeah, there was one
Somebody
that
did say that. Yeah.
Kyrie Irving or someone, I don't know.
But yeah, what you're doing is assuming that what the mainstream media is telling you is the truth. You're not hearing counter arguments, and I don't mean from crackpots. I mean from some very well-respected, researched, established doctors who are giving other information. But that's deep six right away. That's not objectivity. Yeah,
No one said, I don't think anybody would claim that it is if you have your thinking cap on. What we are seeing with COVID especially is an evolving drama of where we are with this disease. Most times when you have a disease that eventually gets to have a vaccine for it, smallpox, polio, things like that, the time frame for people and dying is much wider, much longer. We see now almost 1 million people dead in this country from COVID. We have never seen anything that galloped through the population quite like this.
Sure, we
And
did.
you're seeing people in the medical profession who are saying, we're going to try as best we can as we go along to get the facts right. That doesn't mean we're going to be 100% accurate.
Right.
And when we make a mistake, we will say, this is what the situation is now. Not
Right. Are you aware of the fact that if you go into the hospital with let's say a heart condition and you die, and they also see that you have COVID, that's automatically listed as a death from COVID. On and on and on like that. You go to the VAERS website, which is an official government website, they're showing thousands of cases of adverse reactions, sometimes death from the shots, but you don't see that on the mainstream media. This whole thing, I'm not saying that COVID didn't sweep through the country and cause a lot of deaths, but the way the deaths are counted is a whole different story. And you don't get that kind of analysis on the mainstream media. Again, you can't just, we're used to assuming that what the mainstream media says is accurate because we grew up in an era where I think it was more accurate than it is now. And a lot of people see, if it's in print, if it's on TV, it must be true. But, you can't make that assumption anymore, especially with the press now, with the media now being so politicized. They're not objective reporters or looking to be objective anymore. Now, look at Fauci. Fauci said originally, all this mask baloney. He originally said you could find this on tape, that the masks are not effective, and they're not unless you get the high-end masks that'll stop some of that. The other masks, that's just window dressing. Yet he pushed that. He didn't make the distinction between high-end masks and masks that do nothing for you. That went on and on. First, no mask necessary, then one mask, then 2 masks, maybe even 3. I mean, they're so inconsistent, and it's not science-based no matter what they say. It is politically based. Look at this baloney about there wasn't any chance that the leak could have come from the Wuhan lab. It had to be from that wet market that was just close by. Fauci, you could see what's coming out now if you look beyond the mainstream media, the emails back and forth, how Fauci was telling his cohorts to kill any suggestion that it could have come from the Wuhan lab, even though the evidence was there. You could see that in the emails that many of his cohorts were saying it probably did come from the Wuhan lab, but that couldn't be the cover story. So what I'm saying is, you can't automatically assume that what Fauci or others are telling you is true.
Not only that, Fauci, and it's probably connected with Pentagon and other kinds of research, they were barred from doing gain and function, that is germ warfare, it amounts
Yeah.
to. They weren't supposed to do it here.
Yeah.
And they had projects in which they then offloaded it to colleagues in China.
And funded it. And funded
They
it.
funded it. It's a secret thing. Now, probably now, for them to admit it, they'd probably be accused of violating national security laws. They could get punished. So they keep up the cover story. But I think it's a cover story for them to denounce anyone who says it could have come out of the Wuhan lab, because they don't want people to look at the actual kind of secret germ warfare projects that the Pentagon and the health people are involved in.
And nobody will criticize China because they're so tied in financially with China. Big pharma, the politicians who get donations from the big corporations who make money by outsourcing to China. I mean, China is taking over the world by waving the buck in front of us. And we're grabbing that dollar, and the hell with jobs here, the hell with the technology, let the Chinese have it as long as they're making a lot of money up front. That is what's going on, and there's no coverage of that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with a lot of that. I agree with what you're saying on that. Yeah.
But getting back to our original topic. Now, Ken, in literature, in movies, should they also not use that word anymore? Or
no, I think they should.
Slurs?
I think it's fine in terms of context. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
But I don't want to have a situation where only that word and that insult is liberated, you might say. Let it has to go for everybody, and then see what people think. In other words, the derogatory terms applied to other groups. They shouldn't be squelched, and only the black one be the one that people are supposed to sit back and accept. That would not be fair. So you either have to have a wholesale of an environment in which all of these terms are going to be flying all over the place. And who knows, I don't know, maybe that desensitizes people to it, or maybe it makes people think, maybe I shouldn't be doing this because someone can do it to my children and my family. They can insult them and our background. And do we want that to happen? Do we want a world or society like that? So people might correct some of this more on their own, rather than have outside forces come in and sort of like, puritanical rules. No, this one you can say, that one you can't say. This one's going to cost so and so his job. That one's going to not cost that person a job. It's got to be fair for everybody.
I think there should be no misgivings about disparaging French Canadians. I think that should be open season on them. That's an inside with Brian, who has connections to French.
Oh, really? Yeah.
What?
Well,
I mean, what is the derogatory word?
We're not supposed to call people Canucks, remember? But they have a team that they can call Canucks.
Canucks.
But I know in Canada, they're not supposed to be saying that to them.
Yeah, yeah.
My experience, where I grew up in Bristol, Connecticut, we had an almost exclusively white high school. I think there were 4 or 5 black students and maybe 2 or 3 Hispanics. That's it. So we had this tremendously insulated and insular school. So I never heard any of that stuff that Larry heard when he was in Waterbury, where the racial mixture was much more broad. And when I went to college, I started hearing things. And when I started working, I started hearing things that I never heard when I was a teenager, because we were all of the same stripe.
Oh, how could you be? Really? Didn't you have people? We had people from all backgrounds in our school, but some guys would call someone a Krauts. Oh, those were Krauts. Those were Polacks. Those were this and that. And most of the time, almost all the time, it wasn't really mean-spirited. Those were Dagos.
Yeah.
Those were those were WAPs.
Yeah.
And those were frogs. Those were chinks. They had all sorts of
Yeah.
terms.
To this
But
day,
just mean-spirited.
to this day, there's a friend of mine who's an Irish,
Mhm.
Irish American, let's put it that way. And
Basic-
he always found it amusing that I would come out with certain French phrases, only because I heard my father say them. And one of them was the word Christ, which is French for Christ.
For
And
what?
Christ.
Oh,
Jesus
Christ.
Christ. Jesus
Oh,
Christ.
oh, Jesus.
And I would say it when I got frustrated with things. And he found that hysterical. To this day, when he communicates with me by email or by regular mail, he opens the line and says, "Hi, Chris."
Mm.
He doesn't say Brian. He never says Brian anymore. He says, "Hi, Chris." You know, and I could get pissed off at him if I wanted to, but look, if he finds humor in that, maybe he needs to. I don't know, but it's something that some people put up with because they don't want to start a fight. I don't know if the N word is in that category. I think that's a little higher in
Well, it
debate.
is.
In
If they
debates,
want to start a fight or they don't want to start a fight.
that's right.
I mean, that's what it boils down to.
Yeah.
In the funny, the Brits were called limeys.
Yeah.
Other
Yeah.
thing, and you could hear the Bela Lugosi movie where Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi said, "That limey bastard, such and such, such and such," and
Yeah. Yeah.
so some Brits might say those might be fighting words in some context.
Yeah.
In others, it wouldn't be fighting words.
We
And I
know.
can't remember the sorts of terms for Irish. And then the Irish among themselves, they say, "Oh, that's a lace curtain. Oh, there's this kind of Irish and that kind of Irish." People have all sorts of derogatory. The Scandinavians, it turns out the Norwegians took the role of the Polish among the Scandinavians. That's what a Norwegian told me. He said, "Oh yeah, over there, the jokes that you have Polish jokes you hear over here. Well, we get that as Norwegians from the Swedes and the Danes."
Well, Brian, I remember you being offended when we were both working in Waterbury way back when Warren Atwin was accused of mass murder.
Yeah.
The local newspaper described him as a roofer from Maine, which you thought was offensive because that was castigating French Canadians that are identified as coming from Maine and allowed them to work such as roofing. And you took offense at that description.
Well, only because I knew that when I had relatives come down from northern Maine to live in Connecticut because there were more job opportunities here, while they had Maine plates on their car, cops in Bristol used to walk by that vehicle and walk around it while the car was stopped at a red light and peer inside to see what they could see.
Yeah.
Officers of the law with no purpose whatsoever except to look at that marker plate.
Yeah.
If you don't call that screwed up, I don't know what it is.
Yeah. I mean, there's different sensitivities. And by the way, Kent, I think maybe you should think about renaming your podcast, The Last Negroes at Harvard. Isn't that a
No, I was gonna rename it The Last N Word at Harvard.
Yeah.
There you go. Good luck with that one.
I think that's catchy,
Here's an
Yeah.
opportunity
Yeah.
to explain to our viewers what that podcast and what that title is all about, Kent.
Well, it's basically, I mean, the whole podcast is about, and the book is about the Harvard class of John and I were in the Harvard class of 1963. We went into Harvard in 1959, and basically over that period of time, the nation changed and the use of the word Negro changed, and people left as feeling that they were Black or feeling that they were African Americans. I mean, and during that time, there was the ascendance of Malcolm X and things like that. So it reflects that sort of change in the nation as well as our thinking.
Interesting though how these words change meanings. And
yeah.
I could remember growing up as a kid, to call somebody Black was the big insult. but then it changed during the 60s, so black became the standard non-prejudicial description of a black person.
Yeah, because Negro means black. They got it from the Romance languages, Portuguese and Spanish. So why? So it's kind of an absurd thing in its own way to say, why take this foreign term? You're going to apply this to a people. So people wanted. That's why some people said no. Everyone else has some kind of geographical thing. So people say no. It's going to be African American or Afro American would be a better term. But if you're going to say, why say Negro? Well, you can just say black.
Yeah.
Black would be a stigma, but Negro not. That's an absurdity that something meaning black in one language is insulting, and regular black and regular English is insulting, and Negro is not. I mean, come on.
Do you and Kent know what the term Molignan means?
Molignan?
Molignan.
I see it in the gangster movies.
I'll give you an inside tip as an Italian American. If you ever hear an Italian American call you a Molignan, it's an insult, because a Molignan in Italian means eggplant, which is black.
Right. Yeah. I didn't know what it meant, eggplant, but I know that's what the name was for black people.
Yeah.
Oh wow!
That's right.
I didn't know that. that.
That's right.
I learned something.
Hence the term yam. Yeah. Hence the term.
Then you have the great in that movie. Not a Tarantino movie. I can't remember who it is. It's when the Sicilian is brought in, and the other guy who's being tortured tells the Sicilian that he looks to him like he's a black guy.
Yeah, because
Christopher Walken, I think Christopher Walken is being the Sicilian,
right?
And he said, "Yeah, you people came from North Africa, and you're nothing but N words."
Yeah.
Anyway.
And there's historical accuracy to that, because Sicily was invaded so many times, including by the Moors. So they have black blood. So
100 years.
So I think that wraps us up. Any comments?
Okay.
We're all still friends, right?
We're all still friends, and we never really solve anything. But I mean, we got to solve the.
I think it's interesting that John and I, one white guy, one black guy, come off as the conservatives, and you and Bryant, one white guy, one black guy.
Exactly. Right.
Well, we'll see how long this lasts.
Right. We'll see what happens the next session.
All right, guys. So once again, for joining us, Ken Garrett, John Woodford, Bryant Thomas, and Larry Sperano. Thanks once again. We'll see you soon with another entertaining and, we hope, informative session. See you later.
See ya.